The first thing I felt was the heat, a strange heat, which did not come from cheap wine or the muffled music of the bar, but from his look. Fierce, predator, as if I devoured me right there, without needing a word. I knew it was a mistake. I knew I should get up and go out. But for a moment, I wanted to forget the accounts, the hospital, the exhaustive shifts. I just wanted to feel. Do you always think so much before you do what you want? His voice was hoarse, loaded with malice. My throat dried up. I could have made up an excuse. I could have said I was there just to relax. But I didn't lie. Not for him. His mouth found mine with contained despair, as if I was a forbidden secret he needed to prove. The taste was alcohol and sin. My nails dug into his shoulders as I felt his hands tighten my waist, pulling me against his hot body. That night, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that the next day, when I entered the Kane Corporation, I would find that same look, cold, calculating, and that he would be my boss. The air got heavy as I entered Kane Corporation that morning. The impeccable lobby, the hasty employees, everything seemed normal until I saw him. He was there, imposing, with impeccable suit, his arms crossed and that sharp look, the same look that, hours earlier, burned my skin in a completely different way. My stomach rolled. The blood froze. Alexander Kane, the CEO, the man who commanded everything. The same as, a few hours earlier, I had pressed me against the wall of a bar, whispering dirty words in my ear, sliding my fingers dangerously through my thigh. My heart fired. What would happen now? He noticed when I stopped walking. His gaze found me, and for a second I swore to see a fun trace. The bastard was having fun with that. "Miss Taylor," he said slowly, every syllable loaded with irony. My whole body was tense. God, what had I done? "Enter my room. Now," he ordered, without deviating his eyes from me. Swallowed dry. My feet moved by pure reflection, but my mind shouted, "This will give shit." And I was right. The living room door closed behind me, drowning the buzz of the office. My heart hammered, each beat stronger than the previous one. Alexander was leaning against the table, his dark eyes stuck in me, studying every detail of my body as if evaluating a commodity. He knew. I knew I was desperate. I knew that every penny I earned would go straight to pay my mother's hospital. And worse, I knew I couldn't refuse what I was about to offer. "You need money. I have money." His voice was a velvet loaded with power. "But I don't give anything for free." Swallowed dry. My skin shivered, and it wasn't just for fear. It was the way he spoke, as if I was sure I would accept it. He continued without haste, as if he was having fun with my tension. "I want you by my side, not as an employee, as something more interesting." My breath failed. He was not suggesting. He was imposing. The proposal was clear. Money, in exchange for my submission. And I didn't know if I hated or if I was about to say yes. I accepted. Not with words, but with silence. With the way my breath was stuck in his chest as he approached. With the almost imperceptible tremor of my fingers. Alexander smiled. A dangerous smile. "I knew you had won." He took an envelope on the table, his long, firm fingers sliding down the paper before pushing him toward me. Good choice. My eyes fell into printed numbers, enough to ensure my mother's treatment, enough to buy my submission. He knew I had no choice. "You will be my company in the events I need, business trips, social meetings, and when I want, you will be available." Every word of his was a blow against my dignity, but my hand still trembled when I touched the envelope. Alexander noticed. He took my hand, sliding his thumb slowly over my skin, as if marking territory. "You'll learn to obey, Lizzy." The voice was low, but the tone was an order. My body reacted before I could control it. My wrist accelerated. My breath was erratic. The shiver that traveled my spine was not just fear, and he noticed. In the first event, I already understood what he wanted from me. Alexander didn't just need a woman next door. He wanted control. As soon as we entered the luxurious hall, I felt his hand firmly on my waist, guiding me as if every step of mine belonged to him. I introduced myself to the partners, smiled at the right time, was the perfect escort, but he wanted more. When we passed near a group of entrepreneurs, his hand went up a little more, his fingers pressing my skin in a way that made me hold my breath. His gaze found mine, intense, loaded with a silent message. That was not just about business. It was a warning. Later, as we toasted with an influential couple, Alexander tilted his head and spoke against my ear. His voice was cold, but his breath too hot. My body reacted even before my mind processed the words. He knew. He always knew. In the car, the tension accumulated. The silence between us was loaded, and I felt the weight of his gaze on me. When we stopped, he looked at me for long seconds before finally saying what I expected. The game was just starting. The business trip was the first time we were really alone. The hotel was luxurious, the kind of place where silence weighed and every detail exuded power. Alexander looked comfortable there, as if that environment were an extension of him. I, on the other hand, felt every cell of my body on alert. During dinner, he kept his usual impeccable posture, calculated words, looks that seemed to cross my skin. But something changed when we returned to the hotel. In the elevator, the space seemed smaller than it really was. His smell, the dominant presence, the way his gaze was holding me in place. When the door opened, I felt the touch. Not an accident, not something subtle. It was firm, hot, decided. His fingers slid down my wrist before they climbed down my arm. The electricity traveled my body. Each muscle waged between retreating or giving in. The air was dense, and every second seemed to drag my sanity together. Do you feel that? His voice came low, loaded with something dangerous. I felt so much that my skin burned. My body betrayed my mind, and he saw. The elevator stopped on our floor, but my legs looked attached to the floor. Alexander smiled. He already knew the answer. His room was on the same floor as mine. We walked in silence through the hallway, but the electricity between us seemed to throb with each step. When I stopped in front of my door, he approached a little more. My body reacted before my mind, getting tense, hot, warns. You know that doesn't change anything. His voice came out low, surely loaded. He wanted to remind me that this was a contract. A deal. Nothing more. But the way his gaze came down to my mouth told another story. The space between us has dissolved. My heart was beating out when I felt his hand on my neck. A firm, possessive, demanding touch. Alexander did not ask. He took. His mouth found mine with a gross desire. Without permission, without hesitation. The taste was a mixture of control and danger. And when your fingers tightened my waist, a wave of heat made me forget everything that should keep me away. My lungs begged for air, but I could only feel his body by pressing mine against the door. My sanity said to stop, but my body surrendered without fighting, and he knew he had just beat me once more. I should have stopped that night, place a limit, remembered that this was just an agreement. But Alexander was not an easy-to-resist man. The way I looked at me, as if I already knew what I would do before I even decided, as if I challenged me to retreat, knowing that I couldn't. The next morning, he called me to his suite to discuss details of the next event. That's what he said, but his gaze suggested something completely different. The room was impeccable except for a bottle of whiskey open on the corner table. He noticed when my eyes fell on her. "Nightmares," he murmured, his voice hoarse, as if fighting something inside him. Alexander Kane, the man who dominated rooms full of blinking, seemed vulnerable. Curiosity beat me. With what? His eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw something. There, a shadow, a weight that he didn't let anyone see, but it was just a second. The control returned, and the cold man reappeared. "You ask too much questions." He walked away, but at that moment I knew. He had scars that no one saw. I should have realized that it would not be hidden for long. Valentina's gaze hit me the moment. I entered the office, cold, calculating, like a sharp knife ready to cut. She was there, sitting in Alexander's chair, cross-legged, impeccable expression. "You are very close to my husband." The accusation was not straightforward, but it was there, dripping poison in each word. I was standing, keeping my posture firm, even if my heart was rapid. Valentina was not any woman. She was intelligent, dangerous, and above all, territorialist. "I'm Alexander's assistant. Proximity is part of the work." She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. His gaze was from those who already knew everything. "Don't be naive. I know how to recognize a woman who is in my husband's bed." My breath crashed, but I didn't lower my eyes. She got up slowly, walking to me, the jumps echoing on the marble floor. His eyes ran down my face, evaluating every detail, every weakness. "Watch out, honey. He can be cruel when he gets tired of his toys." I felt a shiver, Not of desire, but warning. Valentina did not make empty threats, and I just became her target. My phone vibrated nonstop that morning. First were messages from office colleagues, then called insisting on unknown numbers. When I finally opened the email, I felt the blood freezing. An attached video. The file loaded slowly, as if the destination itself was torturing me. As soon as the image appeared, my heart shot. It was me and Alexander. A perfect angle of the security camera, showing the exact instant when he pressed me against the door of the hotel room. The way his hand held my waist, the way I surrendered to the kiss without hesitation. That was not just a moment of weakness. It was proof of what happened between us. My mind spinned. Who filmed that? Who had access to the hotel cameras? Before I could react, another message arrived. This is just the beginning. Panic mingled with anger. This was not an accidental leakage. It was a threat. I ran to Alexander's room, feeling my stomach to turn. He already knew, and by the way that held the cell phone, I knew exactly who was behind it. The problem was different. He didn't seem surprised. I entered the room without beating, without thinking. Alexander was there, sitting behind the table, his fingers turning his cell phone over polished wood. His gaze found mine, too calm to someone whose life had just been exposed. You already knew. My voice came out firm, but inside, everything was shaking me. He let out a heavy sigh before getting up. He walked to the window, as if choosing the right words. I knew this would happen at some point. I just didn't expect it to be so fast. I crossed my arms, trying to ignore the way his cold tone pissed me off. Who did that, Alexander? He turned his face toward me. This time, I saw something in his eyes, not anger, something worse. Resignation. Valentina. Her name was like a sharp blade cutting the air. My stomach rolled. Valentina's gaze, his words, the veiled warning, everything made sense now. She wants to destroy you. He smiled, but there was no humor. There. She wants to destroy both of us. The weight of words fell on me. I was not just a piece in the game. I was the main target. The office door closed behind me, but the silence between us was deafening. Alexander watched me. The dark eyes, the jaw crashed. There was something about him that seemed different. Wait, an internal dilemma that he didn't show to anyone. Are you going to escape? The tone was low, but loaded with something I couldn't identify. Challenge, maybe, or fear. My mind shouted yes, that I should run from there and never look back. But my body was a constant betrayal. I took a step back, but he moved faster. In an instant, Alexander was before me, the warmth of his presence burning my skin. Say you don't want that anymore. His voice was a request and an order at the same time. My throat dried up. He expected an answer, but I couldn't give it. He pulled me, and his mouth took mine urgently. There was no control. There were no rules. Only the chaos of two bodies that should never have touched. When we move, panting, I saw the truth in his eyes. The war was about to start, and I didn't know if I would leave her. I didn't sleep that night. Each time I closed my eyes, via the video, the anonymous messages, Valentina's gaze, the weight of the warning she gave me. Alexander wanted me beside him, but what did that mean? Was I just a whim, or did he really need me in this war that started? My phone rang. The hospital. I answered in the second touch, and the cold took over my chest even before hearing the nurse's voice. My mother had a worsening. They needed more money to continue treatment. The choice was drawn before me as a sentence. If I stayed, it would make me part of Alexander's world. I would give me a man who knew no limits, would lose me in this game where power and desire mingled. If I left, my mother would pay the price. I wanted to hate it for it, but the truth was more cruel. I hated myself, because deep down, I wanted to stay. I looked at the phone screen. A message from Alexander. Only 3 words. Come to me. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of my own weakness. I already knew what my answer would be. I should be afraid when entering that limo. Alexander was sitting in the corner, legs crossed, a glass of whiskey spinning between his fingers. His eyes rated me the instant I settled next to him. You came. There was satisfaction in his voice, a tone of those who knew that in the end I would not escape. I crossed my legs, keeping the expression neutral, but my skin still carried the weight of the choice I made. I had no other option. He smiled, but did not argue. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth. The car slid down the city's dark streets. I felt when his hand found my leg, rising slowly, exploring the space he knew how to be his now. Are you ready to play this game to the end? My heart accelerated. I knew what that meant. It was not just about desire, power, or money. It was about sinking me beside him, entering a world without return. My breathing got stuck in the chest. I am. Alexander tilted his head, analyzing my answer. Then, without hesitation, he pulled me close, sealing our pact the only way he knew, with absolute control. I surrendered, and at that moment, the world I knew ceased to exist. I could say it was the hardest choice of my life, but it would be lying. Deep down, I always knew that fate would pull me to Alexander. From the first night, from the first look. The problem is that once in the game, I couldn't leave anymore. My mother would have the treatment. I would have the money. But above all, Alexander would have me. I sold my soul. Or was I saved? I still don't know the answer. But one thing I learned. In this world, no one wins for free. Everything has a price. And in the end, there is only one. Question. If it were you in my place, would you have accepted this pact? Or would it run away before losing control? Now I want to know your opinion. Would you have made this choice or run away while there was time? Comment down here. I want to know what you would do. And don't forget, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more intense stories like this. Want more hot content? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. This helps me bring even more engaging plots to you. We see each other in the next game.